In this lesson, we're going to cover Unit 5, Acquisition 3, Introduction of Redox Reactions. So when we're talking about a redox reaction, there's two parts to it. There is reduction. Reduction is the gain of electrons, which kind of almost seems like if I'm gaining, why is it reducing? But remember, electrons are negative. So reduction is the gain of electrons, whereas oxidation is the loss of electrons. You can't have one without the other. We can't gain electrons unless something else is losing electrons. So these go hand in hand. So redox is for reduction and oxidation. There are two easy ways to remember which one is which. First, oil rig. Oil rig. Oil stands for oxidation is loss. Oxidation is the loss of electrons. Reduction is gain. If you're gaining electrons, it is reduction. The other way, Leo the lion says grr. Leo the lion says grr. So L-E-O, loss of electrons, is oxidation. L-E-O spells Leo. Gain of electrons is reduction. G-E-R. Leo the lion says grr. All right, first example. Determine which element is oxidized and which element is reduced. First reaction. Let's say we had a synthesis reaction. Sodium plus chlorine produces sodium chloride. An atom by itself in its elemental form has an oxidation number of 0. So the oxidation number of sodium is 0. Same thing with diatomic chlorine. An element by itself in its elemental form has an oxidation number of 0. Sodium is a group 1 metal. Group 1 metals have an oxidation number of positive 1. Chlorine is a halogen, group 7. Halogens have an oxidation number of negative 1. So now, we need to look at sodium and look at chlorine and figure out which element is oxidized and which element is reduced. Remember, electrons are negative. So if you're losing electrons, it becomes more positive. So let's look at sodium. Sodium goes from a 0 to a positive 1. That means sodium is the element that is oxidized. Sodium is oxidized. And again, the reason we know that sodium is oxidized is because if it's going from a 0 to a negative 1, it's becoming more positive, it had to lose electrons. Chlorine is reduced. Chlorine goes from a 0 to a negative 1. So it's being reduced. It's going from a 0 to a negative 1. Reduction is the gain of electrons. If chlorine is gaining electrons, it's going to become more negative. If you're losing electrons, it becomes more positive. Same question, let's try another reaction. Let's say I had magnesium plus HCl producing magnesium chloride plus hydrogen. So the first thing that we want to do is go through and assign oxidation numbers. I have magnesium by itself in its elemental form. Its oxidation number is 0. Hydrogen bonded to a nonmetal. Its oxidation number is positive 1. Chlorine is a group 7 halogen. Halogens have an oxidation number of negative 1. Magnesium is a group 2 metal. Group 2 metals have an oxidation number of plus 2. And again, chlorine is a halogen. Hydrogen by itself, in its elemental form, has an oxidation number of 0. So the oxidation number of chlorine doesn't change. So we can ignore chlorine. So magnesium goes from a 0 to a positive 2. So then we have to think, if it's becoming more positive, is it oxidized or is it reduced? Well, if it's becoming more positive, it has to lose electrons. Oxidation is the loss of electrons. So magnesium is oxidized. That means hydrogen must be reduced. Hydrogen starts at a positive 1, and it gets reduced down to 0. Reduction is the gain of electrons. If it's gaining electrons, it becomes more positive. Let's do one more. Let's do iron plus oxygen producing iron 3 oxide. Alright, elements by themselves in their elemental form have an oxidation number of 0. Oxygen usually has an oxidation number of -2. I don't have a rule for iron. 3 oxygens, each with a -2, gives me -6. I know that the sum of my oxidation numbers must equal 0. Therefore, iron has to be +6. But here's where we have to be careful. I have 2 irons. So if I have 2 irons and the sum of my oxidation numbers have to be +6, that means iron must be +3. So iron goes from a 0 to a +3. Oxygen goes from 0 to a -2. So now think about which element is oxidized and which element is reduced. Oxidation is the loss of electrons. If you lose an electron, it's like subtracting a negative, it becomes more positive. So iron is oxidized. We can very clearly see that oxygen was reduced. It goes from a 0 down to a -2. Reduction is the gain of electrons. If you're gaining electrons and electrons are negative, your oxidation number becomes more negative. So iron is oxidized and oxygen is reduced.